Well, we're just going to get started here with our learning here. I've given everybody a source sheet, should be in front of you. And if anybody didn't get one, I have a couple extras up here. I have one extra. I think the other one's got claimed, but one extra. So, yeah, let's get started. So
You're very soft. Can you get
Speaking to the mic?
I don't know how to make it closer.
you need to speak into the mic more?
Does that work for you? Is that better? Can you hear me now?
Not really.
What? Oh, okay. So now you're part of a covenant. So around this time of year, Elul, we start to do all of our cheshbon nefesh, or spiritual accounting, thinking about teshuvah, and start thinking about just how much we are responsible for. And it turns out, beyond the day-to-day of life, there's also all these mitzvot, as it turns out. And I wanted to talk a bit about what that means, what it means to be part of this covenant, what it means to agree to this covenant. How can we agree to this covenant? So if I would love to get a volunteer to maybe read in the English the first two verses here on the page from our parsha. Yes, Joey, thank you.
I make this covenant with its sanctions, not with you alone, but with those who are standing here with us this day before God and before our God Hashem, and with those who are not with us here this day.
Thank you. So that's pretty stunning, right? It makes sense that those who were standing there at that moment would be signing on to the covenant, but even those who aren't there are apparently signing on to the covenant. That is all of us in this room, those who came before us, those who will come after us. And I'm just curious, I want to hear some reflections on that. What does this mean? How would it work? What are some consequences? Yes, please.
It's possible that he's talking about the 40 years of the Midbar.
Okay.
So that's one thing. All the Jews, all the people that died during the 40 years in the desert. Or it also means the neshamot. They are the neshamot that are already born, and the neshamot that are still to come that are not around here now.
Right. Beautiful.
So it's either the Midbar, all the people that lived during the Midbar years, or the Nishamot that are not born yet.
I like that. That's so interesting. I hadn't thought about it just being the next generation that's going to come, right? Immediately after with Joshua. That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Any reflections? What are the implications of this? Yes, Mike.
I was thinking also in terms of it applying to those who are not yet born, and that what it would imply is that those who are making the covenant with God are doing it not only on behalf of themselves, but on behalf of their descendants. And what would that would imply, besides that they're agents for these unborn children that they're making the covenant for,
right,
is that they would have an obligation then to teach them.
To teach them, okay.
Otherwise, how would they know that they're obligated by the covenant unless they were educated in that way?
Right. Great. Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody else here?
It can also mean that.
Thank you.
Not only with you that I'm doing this brit, but what was the idea that I was gonna? ולא איתכם לבדכם אני קורא את הברית לדורות הבאות, to all the generations that come after.
Right. So yes, please.
Okay, I'm not sure if this is out of context, but it could theoretically mean also Jews and non-Jews.
Oh, interesting. Say more. Yeah.
Applies to non-Jews as well.
Right.
The Jews are there, but I'm not sure. Is this at Mount Sinai, or is this what's the context here? This is this parsha, right? Yeah. Okay.
Right. That's yes, please, Bob.
What I may hear is community. That this is directed to the community. The community who's there, the community is everyone who participates and contributes and is involved in the present and the future. Community is what it's about. Community, future, present, past. Continuity.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So I think what a couple of us picked up on here is exactly what Ibn Ezra says, right? Right here. So, does anybody want to read the Ibn Ezra for us? That's the next source on the page. Or either in Hebrew or in English.
ואת אשר איננו, האם אשר איננו רק יבוא אחרינו, ואינו כטעם העומדים, כי רוחות הבאים היו שם.
Thank you. Thank you. And in English, it's, quoting, and not just, and also with him that is not here with us, but et asher enenu, right? Means with him that is not here, but those will come after us, which is sort of what we discussed, right? It seems like there are only a couple of possibilities, but that holds some major implications. How can we sign on to something? How can somebody sign on to, let's say, a contract if they're not even there? How would you feel if someone's like, you know what, I signed us up for a timeshare. I know you told me not to, but I signed both of our names. Right? It's a bit a bit scary, a bit intimidating. But that's a little bit what we're saying here theologically, is that there's a group of Israelites, soon to become Jews, later in history, who signed on to this covenant in this really powerful, earth-shattering moment, and signed off for us as well. Any reactions or reflections to that? How does that land with you? Other people signing in your name, our name. Yeah.
We are our forebears.
Mm-hmm.
We are what our forebears were,
Mm-hmm.
and are and developed. I mean, we're not just isolated. We're not just dropped out of the sky. We have a history. We were talking about history and memory. We have history. We have memory.
Mm-hmm. So in a sense, because we happen to be sort of knit together in our destinies by sheer dint of being Jews, then of course, someone else can sign off for us. Right. Go ahead, please. Thank you, Joy.
I think it just strikes me as the counter to, the gift is being bestowed in perpetuity to future generations, but it's sort of in contrast to death that we saw with Adam, right? So death was received in, by multiple generations. This is sort of the, counterpoint to that. So
that's interesting. So is it sort of the idea like death came as a result of the expulsion from Gan Eden, and we, because of those actions, have inherited that consequence?
yeah, so this is the opposite inheritance.
That's really fascinating. I want to think about that a little bit.
Also the
Yeah.
fact that whether you like it or not,
Mhm.
the Brit is kayemet,
Yeah.
and you have to accept it because I am the Lord.
Right.
You accept it or not accept it. Those that were before you and after you, the Brit is not to be discussed.
Right. And the Brit is so kayemet, by the way, is so binding, everlasting, that when we think of sort of halachic legal rules when it comes to somebody who is a Jew has maybe left the community or even converted to another religion, they still have specific responsibilities, a way to access Jewish community in a very limited way. It's very hard to stop being a Jew. It is so kayemet, it's so everlasting that you kind of can't get out of it, right? No matter what, in many ways. It's a Brit.
Do you accept it or not?
So what does that mean? So that's really interesting. I wanted to get into that. A Brit one way.
Yeah, it's me. I'm the Lord.
Uh-huh.
I am the creator. It's the Brit. Whether you accept it or not, it's going to be kayem le'olam le'olamim.
Right.
Ever and ever.
So what's said in the room here is that that it's a one-way Brit. It's the moment is I'm God. Here is this agreement. You're going to agree to it. It sounds a little bit. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But maybe a covenant, I don't know what the nuances of the word covenant is, a brit, but it could imply a promise rather than an agreement.
Right. So covenant's an interesting word. Like a Brit is an interesting word because in the ancient Near East, covenants were made between kings and their subjects, essentially. So in a way, the power dynamic is a little bit one way, right? It's
Because there was a Brit
Uh-huh.
Na'aseh v'nishma, the Brit in Mount Sinai, they accepted it.
Right.
Na'aseh v'nishma.
Mm-hmm.
And they, not only they accepted it, but, the Jews were
Mm-hmm.
So this is the second brit, which is the Allah, it's the curse, and the bracha.
Right. Right.
It's a continuation of Naaseh v'Nishma.
It's a continuation of Naaseh v'Nishma. That's beautiful. I like that. Anybody else? Any other thoughts on this? Yeah, please.
In American, contract law, and
Uh-huh.
secular contract law, when you talk about a covenant, usually it's a promise within a contract.
Mm-hmm.
So it is kind of a one-way thing, the way
Okay.
it's used. Although you have to agree to the overall contract, the covenant is one of the promises you make in the contract. That one person makes the covenant.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I suppose you could have two people making the covenant, complementary covenants.
Mm-hmm.
But usually the covenant is something that one of the parties says they're going to do.
Right. So in other words, and correct me if I'm sort of like mischaracterizing what you said. What comes immediately to mind is a lease for an apartment out here, right? You're signing on to an agreement, but there's not a whole lot you can really push back on. You can say I clarify this clause, but you can't really say get rid of these clauses. I want to make noise until 1 a.m. You can't. No. Okay.
That would be what they call an adhesion contract.
Okay.
Which she's implying that what I'm saying that in a contract, one of the elements of the contract are promises, and different parties make different promises.
Right.
Okay, so one covenant, I promise to keep the floors clean. Okay, I promise. Okay, so the tenant says I promise to keep to not to hit hammers in the walls. And then the landlord says, okay, I promise to pay the taxes. Okay, but the covenant is an individual thing that one of the parties, a promise that one of the parties make. It's not the overall contract. The contract is if you make your covenants and I make my covenants, then we will have a contract, and then we'll agree. I'll agree if you make your covenants, I'll agree to make my covenants.
Okay. But
That's sort of the way I interpret
Okay.
contracts.
Thank you.
Adding to that, it says, I make this covenant with its sanctions.
Mm-hmm.
So, adding to what was just said, the covenant's one way, but it has sanctions.
Mm-hmm. Right. Great.
When you sign that lease,
Uh-huh.
there is a precedent.
Right.
You're supposed to pay the 1 month security and 1 month's deposit for the first month.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a precedent. If you don't follow up every month on paying that rent, that amount, the landlord has the precedent of the couple of months before and the 1 month security deposit.
Yeah.
That's a precedent, and when there is a precedent, you have to follow on it.
Right. Right. I like this idea of precedent because it's almost like these leases have existed, right? They exist. This is how we write this kind of contract. I don't know a lot about contract law, so if I'm using the wrong terms, I apologize. But so it's like this is how apartment contracts or how apartment leases are made. This is how they're written. It's kind of a boilerplate. It's standard. And I guess we could sort of say that too for the breed, right? Like this is just what we've been doing for so long. We kind of just agree into it because it's what we've been doing, right? I want to move on to our next source here, the Midrash Tanhuma. If somebody would be willing to read that in the English, that would be lovely.
Whoever reads it, take the mic and put it to your mouth.
Yeah.
There are people on Zoom who really want to participate, and they can hear nothing unless you're about an inch away from the mic.
The Midrash Tanhuma Nitzavim 3:1, Rabbi Abahu said in the name of Rav Shmuel Bar Nachmani, why does it say those who are standing here and those who are not here without using the word standing? Because all the souls were there, even when their bodies had still not been created, it's still for that particular reason. Existence is not started here.
Stated here. So this is sort of this beautiful idea that we were all at Sinai, right? This kind of a homiletical solution to say, yeah, we can sign on to it because we were all there. And I know that I think it's a really beautiful and poetic idea that I connect to in many ways. And it's a, it's a slight, it's a little bit, I mean, it's kind of totally different from the Ibn Ezra in a way, right? Ibn Ezra said, like, no, there are going to be distinct people who come after who are not there, right? And they're going to agree to this covenant. And then the Midrash Tanchuma says, no, all of the neshamot, all the souls were there. So in a way, we all bore witness to this moment. And as a result, we can give active consent in a way because spiritually we were present. How does this land with you? How does this sit with you? Any reactions?
Well, it suggests the fourth dimension, that time
Oh.
is past, present, and future,
Yeah.
doesn't really exist, and that all the souls that are coming, it's all part of it. So it's very modern.
Yeah, I like that. I like that you brought in the fourth dimension, especially just because I love sci-fi. It makes me think of sci-fi, even though it's a very real thing. Anybody else? Mike, I feel like you've got an idea brewing. No? Okay. Great. So, does this feel? I don't know. Does it feel legit? How do you connect to this idea that your neshama was there? Is this meaningful to you? Is this kind of like, oh, that's a neat solution? I don't know about that. Are you skeptical? Yeah. Please, I would love that story.
Okay, this is like a mystical experience that I had.
Okay.
Okay. I was, one night, about 3 months ago, I was just about, I was laying down to go to sleep, and the lights were out, and I closed my eyes, and all of a sudden, I saw these strange letters in my, I actually saw them. I mean, my eyes were closed, but I saw them. It wasn't in my imagination. And then it passed after about 30 seconds. And I went to sleep, and I woke up the next morning, and I said, I've got to, I'm going to Google this and see if I can find these letters, because they were, strange looking letters. And you know what I found out? That those letters were Mosaic hieroglyphics.
Interesting.
And what I read was that that original Hebrew, was taken from Egyptian hieroglyphics and was a phonetic version of it. And very early Mosaic Hebrew looked very close to hieroglyphics. And I saw this, and they showed the 10 Commandments in these hieroglyphics. And I said, that's what I saw in my vision.
Oh, wow.
And so because that is one of my big questions, is there such a thing as a Jewish neshama? In other words, when we go to the other side, are we just, are we still Jewish?
Right.
And so it made me think that, well, maybe my soul was there at Mount Sinai.
Right. That's really interesting. There's a couple of things. Sorry, did somebody else want to say something? Thank you for sharing that. There's a couple of things that you said that I want to pick up on there. You had this spirit experience that came over you, right? That it happened. You experienced it. And you're like, how do I make sense of this? Where our tradition, and as a people, we are deeply rational, right? But we're also deeply spiritual, and that's something that can be kind of hard to square with being deeply rational. You have Ibn Ezra. He says, yeah, this means it just that the people weren't there. Like, simple, done, we're done, right? That's very rational. And then this next explanation is like, no, our neshamot were there. That's a very spiritual answer. So these two sources are taking two very different approaches to interpreting the text. And I love that you brought up sort of the Paleo-Hebrew is what it's called, which was, I believe, it's connected to Phoenician and to hieroglyphics and other things. That's something I've thought a lot about too, right? Like what the text that we have, the actual characters are a sort of form of like Royal High Aramaic, but actual Paleo-Hebrew, which you can actually see today on, say, like coins, like shkalim in Israel. A lot of them will have Paleo-Hebrew on there. That's sort of like what early texts were written in, and what maybe so it's fun to imagine, like, how was this written? Does that impact like the quality of the agreement? How do we engage with this text on that level? So just a fun thing to think about, which I appreciate you sort of highlighting, and thank you for sharing that that experience. Yes.
Quickly, it seems to me everything we do in Jewish life is directed towards the past, towards the present, and towards the future.
Can you just speak into the mic for us, Mike?
Oh.
Thank you.
Everything we do in Jewish life is directed toward the past, what's happened in the past, what's happening now, and towards the future. I mean, we
Right.
educate our children, we
Yeah.
have, that's all.
Yeah, it's that sort of same. That's interesting. You know, we commit ourselves each day, 3 times a day, to teaching our children, to teaching the upcoming generations, to continuing to learning ourselves. Right, that is sort of an ongoing part of the Brit. Speaking of an ongoing Brit, I want to move on to the next text here, which I'm sure a lot of us will also recognize. If someone would be willing to read this short bit right here, that would be lovely. Yeah. And just again, right into the mic so our folks on Zoom can hear.
You talk about we hold these truths?
Yeah, right.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, and deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed.
Wow, that was beautiful. I felt like I was about on the steps of the Capitol. Yes.
I have a question going back for a second.
Okay, sure.
Up in,
After that performance, no, please.
Deuteronomy, it talks about that it is not the spirits of the coming generations that were there, correct?
Yeah,
But
it doesn't explicitly.
But the paragraph after that says because all the souls, I can't put it, souls were there.
So-
Is that interpretations, or is there a difference between spirit and soul?
Great question. So the 2 verses that we'd have here don't make those ideas explicit, but we have our commentator Ibn Ezra who interprets it. Right? He says, I think that this simply means that the people weren't physically standing there, and then we have this 4th century text. You know, the Midrash Tamchuma, the provenance of it's not really known exactly, but it's a form of homiletical midrash. It sort of essentially does its own interpretive moves, right? So that itself isn't actually distinctly part of the text, but it's an interpretation, right? So yeah, thank you for asking that question, and thank you for that incredibly presidential and regal reading of the Declaration of Independence. So this itself is a Brit. This is an agreement, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, that's the language, unfortunately, are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So consent of the governed, I think that's the key word here, right? When we're talking about this agreement, right? Every day we wake up in the United States of America, whether we were born here, whether our ancestors were forcibly brought here, whether the country was built on top of us, whether we immigrated here, whatever it may be, we're here, and there are certain laws and there are certain statutes that apply to us. And I know that they don't always apply to everyone the same, right? It doesn't always feel fair. You know what I mean? And so how do we react to this? Is like when you wake up, you're subject to this law. Yeah, go ahead.
All I would say is that a covenant typically is from a sovereign who dictates what it's going to be and what dictates what the covenant is and what the sanctions are and how it's going to be. Whereas this is political philosophy. This is how we're going to set up the government, men between men. It's very different from a covenant.
Right.
I would say.
Yeah. Interesting.
In my humble opinion.
Yeah.
Well, the basic law of this land is the Constitution. And no matter how many different Congresses or the Supreme Court, they would go over and over it. The basic rules are what the forefathers they described. That's the basic law that every person should at least know that it exists. And that's why some people want to change the basic whatever the the judges or the lawyers. They try to change what the forefathers have written. Look what's happening in Israel
Right.
about the Supreme Court of Israel, what's going on over there.
Right.
But basically, the founding fathers, they knew what they were talking about. But the forefathers of this country, they went according to the law in the Bible. All these liberties and freedoms, they are biblical people. I mean, they took it from the Bible.
Right. And I think that's a good point to sort of to latch onto, because we have this use of the word creator in here, right?
Yeah.
And also it makes us, the laws here and their, I guess, resultant consequences if we violate them are very serious, right? And it sort of like can put the stakes of, our holy breed into a different context, and makes us think about what does this mean when it's applied in a directly enforceable way? Is that even possible? How does that manifest in the state of Israel, for example, right? Like, I think these aren't all questions we can answer today, but I think it's just really interesting to think about how do the stakes of this change depending on the context, and then how do we then react to it? Do we react to it in a rational way, or do we react to it in a spiritual way? In the interest of time, we're going to just move forward here. Rabbi Elliot Dorff, who sort of provided me with a lot of the inspiration for this teaching. In his book, For the Love of God and People, Philosophy of Jewish Law, asks, how can Americans, for example, be morally bound by the promises made by the founding fathers and the state legislators that approved the Constitution long ago, especially because the ancestors of most Americans were not even living within its borders at the time? That's like our breed. We weren't there, or maybe we're spiritually there, who knows? There are at least two answers that philosophers have proposed, and the one that we're going to talk about here harkens to the 17th century thinker Thomas Hobbes, and he argues that if you were still part of a nation on the day, sorry for the typo there, on the day that you become an adult, however a nation defines that, then you have given your tacit consent to all its laws and can be held responsible to obey them. So essentially saying, look, if you're still here, you've given your consent, right? In many ways, it's sort of like we were saying how the breed is, the door of a door, that we're meant to teach it to our descendants, and it becomes normative. If you continue to be a part of this tradition, be a part of this people, you give your tacit consent. And if I could just get maybe one reaction to that, if anybody has a reaction. Yeah.
Overall comment. First of all, this consent of the government, it's the opposite of totalitarianism. Okay, and it's because the king was, Britain was ruling the United States, and the people who live in the United States felt like, that was sort of like a totalitarian government. And I think that basically the Constitution is not like the Word of God, okay? It can be amended, it can be changed.
Right.
It's okay, so it's not something in the past, it's something in the present, and we are continually, every time, we are continually agreeing to the Constitution continually, because it's not a dead document, it's
Right.
a living document. So I don't think the issue is that the Constitution was made, 200 years ago, and I think the issue is if we don't like it, we should legally change it.
Right, and I think that you pick up on a really good point, which I'm going to sort of move us to that. We're just running out of time, so I'm going to move us to the end here. Okay.
Is an inheritance.
Uh-huh.
It's an inheritance. You inherited it to use it.
Right.
That, it's not like it's a constitution.
Mm-hmm.
It's given to you.
Right. Right.
And, the Parsha this week was, this is what happens if you don't listen, and this is what happens if you do,
Right. Right. And so, thank you. Use the word totalitarian and change, right? Our tradition also changes. It's a legal tradition in many ways. The Rabbinic project is a legal project. And so that means that we have a say on how it goes today, right? How things change, how they meet our needs. And there's this idea, in this parsha of lo b'shamayim hi, right? A very famous idea. Like, surely this isn't too baffling. You shouldn't say, what is this law that someone should go out and get for me? No, it should be near at hand and I should be able to go get it. I should be able to understand it. And then we get this idea of if you return, make tshuva essentially, then God's going to make things all go well with you. So I think that it's an interesting theological idea, one with many of its own problems, but as we sort of continue to move through the season of Elul, I think that no matter what we decide, what we think the philosophical answer is, the spiritual answer is, it comes down to the fact that we have the ability to have a voice, we have the ability to give consent or not give consent, and we have the ability to really wrestle with that, which is what we do so much every day as Jews in our tradition. So I want to thank you all so much for coming out here, and I think we're going to move on to Mariv. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Uchtier.